If you've ever thought the Linux and FOSS communities were basically a cult, then this is the video for you. But in all seriousness, a little while back, someone sent me this page from the PC Linux OS wiki titled The 10 Commandments for Linux Users. Now, this was written specifically with PC Linux OS 2018 in mind, but they apply to general Linux distros as well, and apply basically just as much today as they did 4 years ago. And this is sort of a set of guidelines for how you should generally approach Linux. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of break these down and give my thoughts on each of these. And the root user did speak, "Thou shalt not log in as root, use su for administrative tasks." I would also add to this sudo and do as if you're a weird person like me as well. And for most general use cases, this is good enough. Let's say you're installing software, or maybe you want to go and modify a root config, or maybe you compile some code from source and you want to make sure the man pages are in the correct location so you can actually go and use them. In cases like this, there is literally no reason to log out of your user account and then log in as root. However, there are some weird edge cases where you do need to be root instead. Say, for example, you are locked out of your user account. Maybe you haven't used that system for a while and then forgot what the password was. Or maybe you're installing your distro and you set the password for the account to something that you didn't really mean to set it to. Or maybe you're having some issues with systemd where it's not being able to verify one of your partitions. When this happens, you need to log in as root and then run the disk repair utility. Or maybe you're running a lightweight distro like Arch, Gentoo, Void, or maybe something on a web server, and you haven't actually made the user account yet. All of these are cases where you need to log in as root, but as a general rule, it should be avoided. Thou shalt use the package manager when possible. Sometimes installing from source code can't be avoided, but when you use your distro's package manager to install software, you can also use it to update and remove it. This is one of the main strengths of Linux. Generally, I would agree with this, but I would expand it to say, also make use of the build system, which interacts with your distro's package manager. So if the packages aren't available in those core repos, and you're on OpenSUSE, make use of the OBS. If you're on Fedora, make use of Copper. If you're on Arch, make use of the AUR. And anything else out there, make use of that extra system, which might fill in the gaps, even if it's not being maintained by your distro's maintainers. I'm going to do a full video on the breakdown of how I typically install stuff, but usually I go the core repos, then those extra repos which interact with the package manager but might not necessarily be normal repos, then I would use a third-party package manager, usually Flatpak, and then somewhere down the line, it's going to be compiling from source. But there are so few applications I compile from source, I generally don't really consider it. Thou shalt be part of the community. Freely give what you have received for free. Offer help and advice whenever you can. Now, this is going to be a hot take, but helping people is great. I know, crazy. If I didn't care about helping people, I wouldn't be running this channel. But there are certain people out there that no matter how much you try to help them, how much you give them documentation, you give them lessons, you show them tutorials, no matter what you do, there are some people who don't want to help themselves. And I know it might sound bad, but some people are a lost cause, and you shouldn't waste your time on people who don't want to try and improve what they know. But if someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm having this problem, I've tried this, and none of it seems to be working the way I would expect. Do you have a better solution? This is a great person to help, and you absolutely should go and do so. Also, there are certain people who may not want your help. So just because you know that, Linux might be better than Windows, or maybe Vim is better than Emacs, or Emacs is better than Vim, and you have this really big essay about why that is the case, some people do not care. Save your helping for people who actually will benefit from your help. And the next few kind of feed into each other. Thou shalt read documentation and man pages. Always read the documentation the people who wrote the software tried to anticipate your questions and provided answers before you asked. And to any of the developers out there, I would say, please ensure that when you write your documentation, it is actually being shipped with the application. There are so many projects out there I've seen that have this really great online documentation, and the application itself has like a basic help page that shows you a couple of the options, but that online documentation isn't available as an offline copy. It is relegated somewhere to a GitHub wiki or a blog post or things like that. Now, it's one thing if your documentation makes use of this graphical format with like video embeds and image embeds and things like that, and that's totally fine. But if it doesn't, or even if it does, please make sure there is a copy available offline. I'm not even saying you have to go and learn the man page format. Even if it's just the basic markdown form and you chuck it through a man page converter, that's better than nothing. Or just an option in the application that will open up a markdown file or something like that. Thou shalt use the available support system. Switching to Linux can be tough, it can be frustrating, but there are a lot of people out there who want to help you, so let them. If it's a remotely popular distro, there's going to be dedicated forums and dedicated subreddits. If it's a really popular distro, or you just want to learn the basics of a Linux system, there's going to be online courses, and there's also just general communities like general forums, general Matrix servers, general Discord servers. We can go and ask things just about a Linux system. But what is far more important than using the support systems is knowing where and how to actually use them. So Arch Linux, for example, has this reputation of being a fairly hostile community, and from the outside, I can kind of understand why. But a lot of that hostility comes from people asking really bad questions. So let's say you have an application crash. Let's say Kden Live, for example, is crashing. But you go and ask about this, and you don't provide system logs, system specifications, the version of the application, the desktop environment you're running, or anything else which might be relevant to the crash actually happening. You're just asking the question, and people are sort of expected to help you. But without the information, no one can help you. And yes, some people might respond in a fairly hostile way, but if you're going to be asking questions in these places, you need to understand what is expected of you asking the question. This is an exchange, it's not just you getting something for free. Or there's some people who are just asking questions simply in the wrong location. Say r/Linux, for example. This is not a support subreddit. If you want to go and get support, somewhere like Linux Questions is a much better place. And on that note, thou shalt use the knowledge base and search. In most cases, your question or problem has already been addressed. Try to find the answers that are already out there before asking someone to provide a new one. We are not in the 90s anymore. Nowadays, we have these incredibly powerful search engines. Learn how they work, learn how to search well, and you'll find that a lot of the questions you've been asking have already been answered, especially when it's about a fairly popular system. Let's say you're having problems with, like, hybrid graphics with NVIDIA, or maybe you want to go and do something with a GNOME tool on Ubuntu, or maybe something about Linux gaming not working the way that it should be. A lot of the questions you're going to have, someone has asked, and they've probably been asked like 10 or 20 times. But if you are doing something a bit more obscure, let's say you're doing what I do, and you're looking at like random Linux software that maybe 10 people in the world have ever used, maybe then it might be a good idea to ask a question. Thou shalt explore. Linux opens a whole new world of options and possibilities. Try everything you can. Now, this is the first one that I kind of disagree with, but for some people this does make a lot of sense. So for people like me, where you just want to enjoy messing with your system, trying out new software, sort of striving for the perfect setup for you that nobody else would ever care about. For those people, try everything you can. But a lot of people aren't like that. If you're just looking for a good working system, GNOME, KDE are probably gonna be good enough. And then if there's anything else you might need, let's say you want to do some game development, install something like Godot. Maybe you want to do some audio work, maybe mess around with Ardor, for example. But you don't have to go and uplift your entire system just to go and try out everything. Both approaches are totally fine. Thou shalt use the command line, or at least try it. It is a very powerful tool, and is not all that hard to use, really. Now, in my opinion, the best case scenario for a GUI user is the command line should never be required. It may provide way more control, it may be more powerful, might give you more freedom, and for the people who want to go and use it and experience that life, it's a great life to have. But a well-fleshed out GUI environment should handle basically every task a regular user would want to do inside of the GUI. But with the state that Linux is currently in, I do think you should give it a shot and try it out. Thou shalt not try to recreate Windows. Linux is not meant to be a clone of Windows, it's different. Embrace and appreciate the differences. Now, I personally don't want a Windows-like system. I'm running a tiling window manager, it's very much not Windows. And if I wanted a Windows-like experience, I would install Windows. But one of the greatest aspects of Linux is freedom. The freedom to install, uninstall, modify, and break basically whatever you want. And who am I to say that if you want to strive for a Windows-like Linux system, that you shouldn't go and do so? But more importantly, if Windows does something well, I know that's heresy to say, but there are certain things, certain tiny little things that Windows does well. Why wouldn't you want to go and take those things and then copy it to a Linux system? Take the good things, leave the bad, and improve your experience. And lastly, thou shalt not give up. I tried several distributions before I found the one I liked. I still try other distros from time to time. I also tried several different programs to serve one purpose before settling on what I use now. If you don't like the defaults, remember that you can change almost everything to suit you. But if at the end of the day you decide that Linux just isn't for you, that's totally okay. Now you have a first-hand experience of why. It's not like, oh, I don't like Linux because of something I read in a forum that's based on information from 10 years ago. Now you've tried it, and now you understand what the problems are. And that's going to be it for me. So if you were to go and modify these commandments, or maybe add some to it, what would you go and change? I would love to know. And if you like this video, I'm going to go and like the video. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe, Sterling Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.